Okay, just gone 11 o'clock, and we'll give people a few minutes to make it through into the webinar, and then we'll make a start in a couple of minutes' time. Okay, I think we'll make a start. Morning, everyone. Welcome back to the MEANZ Business Net Zero Insights webinar series. We will be recording this session. We'll be muting participant mics throughout, so please use the chat function if you need to get in touch with us. And make sure that on your end, your Teams mic is turned off so we can avoid any background noise. We do have a couple of short polls, so you'll need your smartphone to scan the QR code on the screen to take part in those. And we'll be sharing the slides from today's session with attendees as well as the recordings. So today's webinar, if we move on to the next slide, Donna, is the 7th of 8 online webinars being delivered as part of our Net Zero Insights webinar series. My name's Conor O'Dornan. I'm the Net Zero Innovation and Delivery Manager at Mid and East Antrim Borough Council, and I'm responsible for implementing the MEANZ Business Project, which this series is a part of. This webinar is all about the circular economy, how to waste less, and by maximising resources, how you can profit more. We've two excellent speakers joining us to help us first understand the concept and explain how it can be put into practice, and also what it might mean for your business and what it has meant for other businesses. So first we'll hear from Amy Peace from Innovate UK, followed by Ellie Holmes from Crown Worldwide. So the QR code then on the next screen is for the poll. So if you want to scan that now or use slido.com and the code that's on the screen, you'll be able to access the polls when we get to them. So to get us started, I'll quickly run through our agenda this morning, what we hope to cover on this circular economy webinar. We'll give you a quick introduction of the MEANZ Business Project, and then I'll be passing over to our expert guests for this morning's session. First, we'll have Amy Peace from Innovate UK, who's innovation lead for circular economy, and she'll share why the circular economy is important and what programs there are to support it. We'll then be joined as well by Ellie Holmes, Senior Sustainability Consultant from Crown Workspace, who will share her company case study on the circular economy in practice and what it meant for them. We'll have a Q&A with our speakers, and then we'll close out this morning's session with a short summary. So maximum 45 minutes. We'll have 10 minutes from each of our two speakers, first from Amy and then from Ellie. Throughout the presentations, if you do have any questions, please do post them in the chat. The session is being recorded, and we'll have your participant feedback throughout, polls at the start and polls at the end. Please do use the chat if you have any questions or if you do want to get in touch. So the MEANZ Business Project, which this Net Zero Insights series is part of is part of the Fast Followers strand. It's an innovative project as part of the Net Zero Living programme. It's designed really to help local authorities across the UK address non-technical barriers to achieving net zero targets. And our MEANZ business project, which is part of this programme, will increase, or has been increasing, understanding and knowledge of decarbonisation and net zero across the borough and beyond. We have 4 distinct work packages: the Insights programme, which this Net Zero Insights series is part of. We also have a number of other activities within that Insights programme. We have some corporate or council decarbonisation projects that we've been working on internally on our own net zero journey that we've been delivering as part of the programme. We then do a number of projects in partnership with industry as well, and supporting industry to address their decarbonisation challenges. And then finally, we have a Future Ready programme, which is sharing best practice visits, training and mentoring across all of the projects that are funded under the Net Zero Living programme. So next slide then is the first of our polls. We'd just like to find out, again, the QR code is in the top corner, or slido.com with the code. We'd like to know, what are the biggest challenges your business or organisation faces in reducing your own carbon footprint and or reaching net zero, and do choose any and all of these that are relevant. Starting to see some responses already. We asked this question at all of the webinars, and really the purpose for us is to try and understand what the challenges are for you, for stakeholders, for businesses. And then we will that will inform, and we can use that to design our support programs as a council. So finance or investment, not surprising, one of the key things in terms of reducing your own carbon footprint. Some of these answers will go off the screen at the bottom, but you should see all of them on your smartphone as you submit your responses. Okay, 11 responses, probably most of the attendees who aren't speakers. So, and finance and investment, not surprisingly, being the huge barrier there to carbon footprint, reducing your own carbon footprint. Okay, next question then is, whereabouts on the net zero journey do you sit? So as an organisation or as a business, how far along in that journey are you? Have you not started? Are you planning? Are you well advanced, or have you achieved net zero as a business? Somebody has responded that we've achieved net zero as a business, which I think is not a response we get too often. So that's really interesting. Whoever that is, if you're happy enough to write in the chat who you are, we'd love to maybe hear from you and understand how you've done that. I don't know how many people that is achieving that, maybe 1 or 2. But most of you, I suppose, are in the process of having a plan or developing a plan and implementing that plan as you go along. Nobody hasn't thought about it yet, which is great. And I suppose that's part of the reason that you're here today, is to understand a bit more. Okay, that's 12 responses. That's great. So I think what we'll do is we'll move on now to our first speaker. So as I mentioned, Amy Peace is Innovation Lead for Circular Economy at Innovate UK. You should see Amy on your screen now. She's also in the background as well. So I think we can give control to Amy. Amy's going to give us 10 minutes on the circular economy as far as she's concerned, before passing over to Ellie. So.
Excellent. And hello all. Just checking, can you see my slides okay? Does that come through all right, Connor? Excellent.
Yep.
Great. So yeah,
Yep.
As Connor said, I'm going to give a bit of a background. Why is circular economy important to us as Innovate, but also why it should be important to businesses as well? Because obviously, if you're not profiting from it, then it's obviously not necessarily going to be motivated to embrace it. So those who don't know, Innovation UK, we are the UK's innovation agency. Most people know us from grants and loans. So appreciate kind of the financing aspect was very much high on people's priorities. But there are other aspects to what we do. There's also things like knowledge transfer partnerships, how to get sort of knowledge out of universities into businesses. Things like investor partnerships, and actually helping inform and get private investment, investing in the things which we think as kind of a neutral player are the most important things to actually invest in. So circular economy, get right in there. Why is it important? Well, I think for most people, to be honest, in the general public, when they think of sort of what is circular economy and what is the problem with waste, they immediately come to actually when we have problems where waste is actually a really big bad impact. And it is no secret that we may have started some plastics recycling programs not long after the Blue Planet series came to light on TV, and suddenly ministers and other people became very concerned about a lot of ocean pollution. So that's often when people start to think we need to do something about this waste, it's causing a problem. But not all waste is as visible or seen as problematic. For example, some of it we hoard in our drawers, really valuable things. And that's another reason why we like to do circular economy, is because there's still a lot of inherent value left in a lot of the things which we consider waste or just consider drawer fillers, as I say. And indeed, there is more higher concentration of sort of highly valuable metals materials in your average drawer than there is in the mines where they get these original materials from. In fact, even the streets of an average town will have a higher concentration of platinum there from the catalytic converters than you get in a platinum mine. So we spend a lot of effort and see the point of digging these things up when we already have a lot of this value here. And then obviously, particularly kind of in the UK and Ireland, we don't have a lot of these materials naturally found. So when we've already got them here in relatively high concentrations, it's almost foolish to be considering them as waste or shipping them to other countries. And the final reason, and obviously why it's part of a net zero sort of series here in circular economy, but it's not always sort of under net zero. As we've seen, there are other reasons for doing circular economy, is the carbon link. And those of you who have not seen this before, where have you been? But obviously these are the climate stripes, which are the average temperatures from 1850 to present day, blue being below average, and on the right where we are now. In fact, it's even darker red for these last couple of years. So it is a very concerning, pressing thing we need to do about it. And circular economy can help in some cases, but other times there is sometimes a tension there, because actually recovering materials is not always a given that it'll be better than digging things up. So how does emissions and carbon sort of really come into where we make circular economy decisions? So most manufacturers and most members of the general public will consider manufacturers as being all about the emissions in manufacture. And they're the very obvious things of how much energy and thus carbon it takes to make something. But as we know, there are also emissions embedded in the raw materials, how much it takes to dig things out the ground or grow things. There's also the distribution facts of these, and decisions made in manufacturing can influence how much these emissions are. And in fact, when we look at what sort of percentage there are, on average, it's up to about 90% of our UK emissions are actually already embedded in before the stuff actually even gets to the factory. But we're not manufacturing for fun, obviously, even though manufacturing is a great thing to do. We're making stuff for societal needs. And again, decisions we make at the design and manufacturing stage can have a big impact on the amount of emissions we use when those products are actually in people's hands. So this could be making more efficient insulation, so our houses use less energy. It might be on sort of electrical devices needing less power in use, or in consideration of what happens to those at end of life. So making something that's easier to take apart, easier to recover, easier to repair, means you're responsible then for less emissions at that phase. So how do we retain both the value of all that effort we've put into making things, which then should equate to sort of more profit for businesses? So just starting with a typical linear supply chain of making something like a toy robot, typically we start with materials, parts, products, we use them, and then we waste them. Circularity is about all the loops we do, and most people would jump to recycle as being what circular economy is, but we're very much, no, there are some tighter loops that are much more important to concentrate on. So just being able to make something repairable, or even just change a battery, make something last longer, in order to get that same lifespan out of that robot, you're not having to go all the way back to raw materials. You're allowing it to last longer just by making that ability to keep it going longer. Reuse is also important, and that's allowing somebody else to use that product when you no longer use it. Sometimes that once you've completely finished with it, so maybe passing on a toy or selling on a toy to someone else, or actually sharing the use of it. So we often use examples like cars that are sat on our drive for most of the time, but sort of the car share schemes actually allow multiple people to use the same resource. Remanufacture, so that's then if we've got a part that has worn out but the overall thing hasn't. So the likes of, sort of JCB and CAT, they do this a lot, where huge amount of tons of material in those vehicles, but actually by having a remanufacture program, say we will just repair and warranty that item to be as good as new. So we're just taking out the bit that has worn, not the overall thing. Then again, you're not having to go back to raw materials and all that huge tonnage, just the bit that's not working anymore. And then that final loop is recycle, but that really is breaking things apart and having to go through all those steps again. So circularity means that by avoiding all those steps, we are hopefully saving energy and thus saving value for everybody. One final though on this diagram though is regeneration, and just to flag that when we talk about sustainability, still a lot of these steps are about being less bad, because we're still using energy, we're still using resources to make these things. There are some really innovative companies who are saying, right, what is the position I found? And actually, how do we leave the world better than we found it? So this might be sort of looking at things like soil health, regenerating land, making the ocean better than it already is by taking things out of there that are causing a problem. So just something to bear in mind when you talk about being a sustainable business. Are you being less bad, or are you leaving things better? So why is this important to us at Innovate? Well, we do have a UK materials and manufacturing vision for 2050. We're actually going through a refresh of this at the moment. So if you're interested in contributing to that, then use the big QR code, or I'll put the link in the chat later. But essentially, this has got longer in use and reuse has been one of the big priority themes in there. I'm not going to go through all this table, but you'll see a lot of familiar words from my last diagram in there. But these dark green bits are the bits where we're trying to focus a lot of our programs and funding going forward. So not necessarily in those recycling things at the bottom, but how do we keep things in their primary use for longer and not having to go through all those other steps to get back to something useful. So just flagging, this did say circularity related programs in Innovate UK. I have added previous. You might appreciate just where we are in the funding cycle. A lot of these programs have literally just come to an end in March, and we're in that lovely gap whilst we are waiting to be able to announce what the next programs are. Hopefully in summer is when business cases get approved for this. But just as an example, we've had some which are very deep dive things on things like smart sustainable plastic packaging. We've had some sector focused things like transforming foundation industries, looking at sort of chemicals, cement, steel, etc. And some looking at sort of with the research councils, the NICER programme, the National Interdisciplinary Circular Economy Research Programme, really looked at a lot of the sort of challenges, both on behavioural side, but also some of the technical problems in doing so. So I basically say, watch this space. It's important to us, but we can't say immediately what funding's available. So I'll just say thank you, and on to Ellie.
Hi everyone, and thanks Amy for the introduction there. I hope for people listening a few things have fallen into place there. I'm now going to give you a case study of how our business has evolved to a circular model that will probably give you a bit more of like a practical idea of how you can do it. And I believe some of you are in the manufacturing industry as well, so hopefully this will be especially relevant. If I could have the next slide, please. So firstly, I'm Ellie. As mentioned, I'm in the sustainability team as part of a company called Crown Worldwide in the UK. We have 4 brands in a few different industries across logistics, but today I'm going to talk about Crown Workspace, which is the brand that's adopted a circular model. So Crown Workspace is a moves and changes specialist traditionally, which essentially means that when large organisations are looking to relocate or going through time of move or change, we make it happen. The common saying is if you turn a building upside down and shake it, we deal with what falls out, the furniture, the IT, and any miscellaneous equipment. And often, as you can imagine, when organisations are moving, people want to start new. They want a fresh, new and shiny workspace. And that's where we come in. And we've created a number of services to make reuse happen, from refurbishing furniture and IT, operating a resale channel, and having a donation initiative. And I'm going to give you a bit of history of how we got there. But firstly, if we can have the next slide, please. I just want to reiterate what that means, as Amy so succinctly told us. The linear economy is where things are made, used, and then disposed of, which is what we're used to. The recycling economy, better but not great, is where we then break down materials and put them back into loop. But the circular economy is really the end goal. We want to design out waste entirely wherever possible and find ways to keep things from being thrown away at all, replicate natural systems, and, as Amy emphasised, make the most of the value of the things that we're making and buying for your business. And there's a number of benefits for the for businesses, as has been covered. It's not only better for the environment, it can save money. It kind of encourages you to review and address inefficiencies and make the most out of what you buy. It also makes commercial sense. It can give you a positive message to share. And one that's not talked about as much is that it creates jobs, builds skills, and can generate social value. As a lot of traditionally linear industries are declining, the circular economy gives us an opportunity to build skills and create jobs. So I'm now going to go back to where we began as a business, if I can have the next slide. So this journey started around 15 years ago, quite a bit before my time at Crown, but fundamental to our identity today. Huge volumes of waste were coming from our moves and clearance projects. As I said, people wanted to start fresh and something new, and they didn't really want to deal with the old. And we were quoting to just put things in the skip, which at the time, things were predominantly going to landfill. And then at the same time, clients were looking to reduce their environmental impact, but it was still quite like a new thing to be talked about. And people didn't really always know how. Carbon was starting to be talked about a lot, but we saw a big opportunity with reuse. And that brings me to the fact that there was a gap in the market. The pressures were growing environmentally, but within facilities management especially, no one was yet offering a reuse solution. So how did we address this? We needed to understand what the barriers were and why they existed. So speaking to project managers, staff, tried to unpick decisions at every level in our projects of why things were being turned into waste in the first place. What was meaning that they were going to be labelled waste, and what could we do to prevent that from happening? We also spoke to key partners, so even competitors, clients, suppliers, and industry bodies, to see what was important to them. And with that research in mind, we started to reassess our service offering against the waste hierarchy, which is essentially now a more traditional way of looking at waste reduction and reuse. And we now talk about the circular economy. If I can have the next slide, please. So this wasn't always easy. Firstly, we were swimming against the tide. You can imagine 15 years ago, things were a bit different as well. Reuse was against the status quo, and we were essentially trying to reverse engineer the economics of our model and change the framework for how things were quoted for and carried out in our industry. And we had a lot of explaining to do to clients that we were already working with to try and bring people on this journey with us. A lot of investment was required, which isn't always the case, but for us, especially because we were trying to do something at scale and we were basically starting to refurbish items from projects, we invested in machinery, new roles had to be created. We also had to tackle with negative connotations associated with reuse. It's better now because circular economy and reuse, it feels a bit cooler, but at the time it was deemed like, you know, you were just in with the old in a new project. People didn't really like the sound of it. They were worried that things would break and wouldn't be as reliable. We needed to build that trust and build that sort of like idea that reuse can be cool. We also needed new skills to make it happen, which I've touched on. We've created new roles for reupholstery, for operating machinery, to make reuse happen on site, a new team that could deal with donations and resale of products. And to give you an example, we opened up a facility in Wolverhampton about, I think, 5 or 6 years ago. And that's because this was an area that was so traditionally strong in industry, but a lot of those industries were starting to decline, and there was a lot of skills there and craft that we could make use of. So things are a little different now. People are used to the idea of circularity. There's more funding options, and there's more support and case studies available for making it happen. But we got there, and glad to be speaking about it with a success story today. If I can have the next slide, please. We've come a long way since then. Just last year, we re-articulated what we did around the circular economy. I mentioned that the waste hierarchy is now a more traditional way of talking about reuse. So this is what we have today is what you see on screen. We launched Crown Circulate in 2024, which is focused on making it easier to reuse than not reuse. So it's business as usual. We kind of measure it as a few different levels. We firstly need to help clients understand what they have in the first place. Then we'll help them refurbish items, make them as good as new, refresh them with different colours or shapes, and pander to trends that might happen where they want chairs to be blue rather than red, or rebranding. We can also refurbish and resell things. And then we also have a donation initiative. And for me, this is really close to home because the social value in enabling reuse is huge. We've been able to support, we have a network of about 850 charities now across the UK, and we've donated 33,000 items in the last 15 years. And we worked out recently that the social value of that is around £250,000. And especially with the cost of living crisis, to think that so many things worth, with a huge amount of value are being thrown away, it just is a waste and it makes no sense. So in addition to all of this service level innovation, I mentioned I'm part of Crown UK and Ireland. We've got 4 brands. We wanted to then take our learnings from this to expand the circular economy across those businesses, which we're kind of in the thick of at the moment. We've just finished a circular economy framework, and where this looks quite specifically at our services, that looks more broadly, what are we buying in as a business overall, and what are we throwing out as a business, and how can we reverse engineer some of those models across the company. So next slide, please. So I want to end on how you can get started. So first of all, like I said, just look at what you're buying in, look at what you're throwing out. It doesn't have to be complicated to start with. And then you can start to ask yourself a few questions. What materials are you buying in the most? Are they essential? Can they be used more efficiently or reused in any way? And for things that can't be reused and are essential, maybe they could be sourced better. Maybe you could source things secondhand or look at recycled content. And for things at the end of life, are they being managed in the best way? Can you keep things in your control for longer? Enable others to reuse before recycling? And do you have the right recycling streams being serviced? And then look at your partners. What are your clients, suppliers and competitors doing on this, and what are their priorities? And maybe there are opportunities to collaborate or make use of existing work streams. And you can ensure the success of these things by communicating with people every step of the way, provide training depending on skills and interest internally and externally, identify some champions who might really want to spearhead this within your organisation, and focus on the quick wins, share the stories of those, get them embedded, and then you can focus on the hard stuff. So that's me. I hope you found it useful. And if you have any questions, I believe you can put them on the chat, and happy to answer any.
Okay, thank you, Ellie, and thank you, Amy, before that. I don't see any direct questions in the chat so far, so if you do have any questions, please post them in there and we'll pick them up. I suppose I wanted to ask Ellie, if we start with you. You mentioned collaboration with some of your clients, suppliers and competitors, and that being a key avenue for, or something at least to consider whenever you start out in this journey. Your experience of that, has that always been fruitful, or have you come up against barriers when you've tried to do that? You're on mute just before. Yeah.
It's a great question. We've had a lot of really successful partnerships. I think it can be challenging when you're working with people who are kind of competitors. We've often sat in like committees with other manufacturers, usually because there aren't loads of remanufacturers, and can sense that people can be a little bit guarded naturally because of what information they can give up. But I'd say it's just always been good for us to try. And I think because of our position as a remanufacturer, and because we're smaller, we've been able to be a test bed for some ideas within those groups. And I think I'd say that it's 90% of the time really fruitful, especially working with bodies like Business in the Community, for instance, who we've learned a lot from. Yeah, I can't think of a hugely negative experience in trying.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And Amy, I just wanted to go back to Innovate UK. Obviously, you're doing a lot of work in contact with businesses, and are you seeing, generally because circular economy has been around maybe a little bit longer as a concept than some of the other things we're talking about within sustainability, but are you finding that businesses they're already more tuned into it, or where are they on that journey, or are we seeing more progress being made, or is it still uptake slow? And what would the general consensus be with particularly SMEs?
Yeah, I think there's a big difference on different sectors. I think and kind of Ellie's right that in the kind of the built-in environment, there's a real momentum there, and we've had sort of projects on everything's from sort of like the external materials, like how do you reuse steel, and things down to kind of all the fittings and furnishings, which involve a lot of different businesses. And we're seeing certainly places have become like really big drivers in saying, we're going to have more strict things on planning, like a lot of like pre-demolition audits that are really sort of pushing people, like even if they weren't interested in this, they have to do those evaluations on, are there things in this building that we can reuse, rather than just let's knock everything down and build up new. So a lot of businesses, again, depending which sector, are being kind of pushed into this space just because those around have seen, there's a lot of waste on their behalf almost. In other things, again, it is that sort of mixed thing, and we do see a sort of a difference between those who've kind of got the buzzword and have just gone, right, I'm going to do circularity, and almost like for circularity's sake. I do often offer a bit of caution to sort of businesses who go, oh, I've seen a waste stream, see if I can make anything from it, like any sort of material. And typically, sometimes when people start with, I've just found our waste stream and I want to turn it into something, it often means sort of squashing that thing down, adding other materials, forming it into something, and then they go, ta-da, I've done circularity. And it's like, yeah, but what that thing you've made, what's going to happen at its end of life? You've now squashed it with another material that makes it harder to do. So the better businesses are the ones who, kind of like Crown, have gone, right, what are our products and how do we make those circular? How do we retain the value as much as possible? Rather than people just going, oh, I've seen a material and can I turn it into something else? Which I say is a further down thing, and often people stop after thinking round one loop that they've done it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And the end of life element, particularly interesting, as companies are starting to report on their emissions, and they have to consider, for their reporting, what happens to a product at the end of its life. And I know we've had that conversation with companies around, how much control you have over what happens to something once you sell it to a customer, and once your product moves on. So very interesting, and something that I know a lot of the companies are struggling with, or struggling to get their heads around.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more sort of regulations in this space as well coming now. So we have things called extended producer responsibility in some sectors. So that, at its lightest touch is kind of making sure people have the right to repair for certain things. So making sure that parts are available, instructions are available. But sometimes at that light touch, they can be a bit, sort of, it's there on paper, but actually the reality is maybe those parts are a bit more expensive than buying the new thing. So it might not motivate people. Whereas, some of the other sort of schemes like that are much more about how people have to pay extra money to account for the end of life dealing. And indeed, we're trying to work with the government and companies so that when that comes into new sectors, it's not just sort of arbitrarily sort of done, let's put like the plastic bag tax or something. Will it actually drive behaviour in the right way? Will that money get back to those innovative companies who are trying to do the right thing? And indeed, some of our programmes have actually come because of money that's been sort of collected through schemes like that, have then gone into sort of innovation pots. It's like, right, now can we help businesses do the right thing? So I think when it's done like that, it's done well. But sometimes people can feel like it is a burden. I'm just having to pay more on my products and I'm not actually seeing it take effect in the right way.
Yeah. Excellent. And Ellie, just one final question for yourself. Obviously, conscious that we have some SMEs and probably even micro companies on the call that are maybe have an understanding of their waste streams already. But in your experience, if you were to give them one single piece of advice to take away around, what they're
It's not just me, is it?
No, I think it's broken up for me as well.
on what you could do or what to think.
Sorry, Connor, you broke up there. You might have to repeat that. Sorry, Connor, can you repeat the question? You just broke up a bit there.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. No, just Ellie, one piece of advice for the companies on the call, if you had to give them one piece of advice to take away, given your experience and given that most of them are SMEs or micro companies.
I think I just want to refer back to that last slide. It might seem daunting. You can start small. You can start by a spreadsheet that just lists what are you buying in and start to consider it in that way, which can also be a cost saving exercise and something you're already doing as part of your scope 3 journey and procurement journey. And then when you're looking at end of life, looking at what you're throwing away, work with your waste suppliers, and just try and think about it holistically, as Amy said. If you're looking at net zero, you're probably already thinking about the carbon hierarchy. Start to think about a similar approach, see where you can eliminate things in the first place from existing without jumping to the throwing money at buying like a new innovative material. Yeah, I think that's me.
Okay. Great, thank you.
I was just going to say, it just also being honest with people of kind of why you're doing that. I mean, we'll go back to kind of saying those whys. It's perfectly reasonable to do a circular economy business because you've got a problematic waste thing that you're kind of like, well, this is going to landfill, it's causing problems, we want to sort of get rid of it. But equally, it might be because we're throwing lots of valuable stuff away, we're having to sort of export this across the world to somebody else to deal with. But don't always assume that, as I say, you're going to use less effort, less energy in order to recover that thing back. You might be doing it for resilient purposes because your supply chains are vulnerable. But I think automatically just assuming that it will tick the box on everything from problematic waste, carbon savings, cost and everything is not always there. So just be open and transparent with people when you're sort of talking through your options.
Okay, thank you both. I think we'll move on. I've turned my camera off. Hopefully that helps with the connection on my end. Donna, if we can move to the final polls. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So again, just to track your learning, and I think we still have everybody that we started out with, which is great. So if you stick with us for the next 4 or 5 minutes, we'll get some of your feedback here. So again, use the QR code on the screen. Give us an understanding of it, whether or not, I suppose, your knowledge and understanding of the circular economy you feel has increased during this webinar. Not to put Amy and Eleanor on the spot in terms of their impact, but again, it just helps us. It helps us track, gives us some information. So we'll give another 10 seconds or so for people to respond to that one. So yeah, no no's so far, which is great. Okay. Donna, if we move on to the next one, supposedly the next question is about how likely are you to undertake circular economy initiatives discussed today? So the types of work which Amy has mentioned or that Crown have taken on. How likely are you to undertake something similar within your own organisation? Is it something you think might work on your end? So yeah, excellent. Seems to be people have picked up activities or initiatives that they could probably implement themselves, or certainly tools and tips to get them on the journey or to progress them further. So that's great. And then the final one, Donna, if we move on, is about what are your most significant barriers? So similar to the very first question we asked, only this is specifically in relation to the circular economy. What are the big things that might be stopping you or preventing you from going down this road and looking at this in more detail? Yeah. Okay. Again, budget investment always close to the top, but appropriate technologies is an interesting one. That doesn't always feature, some of our other webinars, the technologies are say energy efficiency technologies, for example, are very well documented and available, and it doesn't always feature as high as that. So that's interesting. Resistance to change and the behavioral change, obviously something that is
Connor,
significant.
I'd probably say here that we often find sometimes it's not the money people need to buy tech, but it's kind of the money to give people time to really think about it and really plan what does it mean for their business. So like things like feasibility study funding, it seems to be really helpful for SMEs just to go, I've got some funding for my time to go and actually really think about this.
Yeah. No, really good point, and it's something we have a collaborative growth network of companies that we work with, and much of it is about giving them kind of expertise that they can get access to that takes the time away from them, and they can actually do it then with a bit of help. So, okay, I think that's pretty much us, Donna. If we move on to the final couple of slides, we just wanted to remind you, as I said, this is the 7th out of 8 in this series. We do have one final webinar, and it's all about sustainable investment planning. Our host for that one will be City Science, one of our Innovate UK technical partners. That'll take place on Thursday, the 12th of June. And again, it'll be at 11 o'clock in the morning. We'll be circulating information on how to register for that in due course, so keep an eye on Council's social media channels for how you can get access to that. We'll also post that on Council Invest MEA website as well. So yeah, final slide then is I think my contact details, and just to round out the session, if you want to get in touch, you want to find out more information, as I say, we will be sharing the slides and we will be sharing the recording of today's session. So look out for that. And I suppose all let's thank I suppose Donna and Stephen in the background for your help with the webinar and getting it all together and registration, etc. And big thank you to Amy and to Ellie for taking your time out to join us this morning and for giving us the advice and the information and the experiences that you have. And other than that, we'll see you at the final webinar on sustainable investment planning on Thursday, the 12th of June. Thank you.